Hello, and thank you for having a listen to this week's episode of Secure Insights with NDK Cyber. So, as many of you may know, NDK Cyber is first and foremost a cybersecurity recruitment company. We hire individuals from entry level to leadership level for organizations all over the world, industries crossing from end user environments and asset owners right through to vendors and security consulting firms in between. So, very seasoned in this space. Now, we started this podcast with the goal of shining a light on particular areas that are being talked about or should be being talked about at the moment. And now this week, I'm very excited to be joined by Patrick Miller. Patrick is somebody who's been in the OT security space for a very long time now, started out as an OT practitioner himself before going on heavily contributing to the industry, very much seen as a leader in this field, and now leading his own security consulting firm in this particular space. We talk through everything from the state of OT security at the moment, what we're seeing right now, the skills shortage, how we bring people into this space, where the gaps are, how we close that skill gap, and a whole load more. So really excited to share this episode with you. Hope you enjoy, and open to feedback as always. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for coming onto the pod.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For those that haven't seen your work, know about you, know what you do, are you okay to give us a brief overview of your background?
Sure. I am Patrick Miller. I'm CEO of Ampere Industrial Security. We're an industrial cybersecurity consulting firm. Background was a utility guy for many years, on probably at least 15 years or more. Left the utility space to actually go work in the regulatory environment. I was one of the original architects of the NERC CIP standards, and then left the utility to become the first NERC CIP auditor. Stood up the first NERC CIP auditing program under the Western region in the US for NERC. After that, was the principal investigator for the Department of Energy's National Electric Sector Cybersecurity Organization, and then moved out into consulting and have been consulting ever since. But long history in OT. Prior to the electric utility, I did a lot of water, agriculture, and other forms of OT.
Crikey. A colourful resume, to say the least, and yeah, experience on both sides of the fence, I guess.
Yeah. I guess all three, because I'm now a vendor, a utility, and a regulator. So
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Stacks of credentials behind you.
Mm.
So I guess with all that in mind, then, and being the first NERC CIP auditor there, there's plenty of stories I'm sure you've got from old. But just from what we're looking at the moment in the whole OT security space, very broad question, I know, but what are some of the things that you're seeing at the moment?
Well, let's say like the state of OT at the moment, it's transforming faster than we expected. We had, expectations about kind of the digital transformation, and these words have been thrown around for even 10 years or more. I didn't think we expected AI. I didn't think we expected the shift in manufacturing, the geopolitical issues that have caused a lot of things like onshoring, offshoring to shift. So there's been a bunch of factors that have really, I guess, kind of pulled the rug out from under a lot of our original expectations. So OT is still OT. There is still a ton of legacy OT out there. It's not going to get replaced tomorrow. What we will likely see is greenfield OT is going to look very different than the legacy OT. I mean, night and day in terms of difference, just light years apart. So your skill sets are going to be, radically diverse in terms of how you're supporting your new OT versus your old OT, because your new OT looks a lot like IT, and it's kind of just going to be T at some point, or T with a purpose, an OT leaning T versus an IT leaning T. And then, you've got the rest of this kind of mix is going to be the old school stuff will have the new school stuff kind of sistered up alongside it. And that's going to, create those challenges for organizational kind of staffing and maintenance and licenses and all of these issues. But the legacy stuff is still going to be there because it's just not feasible to replace it. I mean, it works. It's going to work for 20, 30 more years. So it just makes sense to kind of transform in a way that makes the most fiscal sense and most reasonable sense for the organization. And unless there is some kind of catalytic event that requires otherwise, and there's opposing forces at the same time, because you've got things like cyber-informed engineering, which is kind of pushing in the opposite direction. I guess not trying to replace the modern OT, but also remembering that we have kind of legacy practices and legacy engineering perspectives for a reason. So I see those two things kind of running together in parallel, but it does create some really interesting challenges going forward.
Yes, you touched on a lot of the points there. I was keen to dive into, I guess.
Oh,
So,
great.
say if we had then this new OT coming through now, we're not talking legacy systems. We're talking the stuff that's being sort of developed relatively recently. Is security being baked into these systems, or is it still, I think in some places, in some areas, even in the IT side, we suffer from a little bit of get it out the door, get it developed, get it up and running. We'll think of security later. Or is now security at the forefront of everybody's minds in this regard?
Yes and no, and that's a bad answer, but it's more on the mindset of the product developers. I mean, I've seen a shift in a lot of these vendors. We've kind of narrowed the vendor landscape too. There's been a lot of consolidation under bigger vendors from smaller vendors, which there's this natural kind of pendulum swing of when innovation comes out, there's a lot of small vendors, and then the big vendors eventually normalize the playing field, and then we have more innovation and it goes back to a bunch of small vendors. So that's going to happen. What we've at least been able to see is there is a bigger interest in trying to get security better as they go forward. They're not perfect. No one can be. There's just too many moving parts, and there's a lot of reasons and, frankly, legitimate excuses. But I have seen a lot of vendors now have like a front door where you can come to them with a vulnerability and they'll have a reasonable discussion. Not all of them. Some of them are still, dinosaurs and try to hit you with a lawsuit and play silly games and that kind of thing. But most of them realize that there is a responsibility. And one way or another, it's going to be the market that shifts them, their insurance that shifts them, or the customer base that shifts them. Or in the last case, the safety net of eventually regulation will come in and kind of shift them into place, at least from a kind of a minimum, you must be this tall to ride the ride kind of perspective. So all of those forces are at play. They are working. They're shifting the needle more than, I guess people would openly see on the outside. From what I see on the inside, it does look better. It's not perfect, but it's getting better.
Yeah, that's fair. And you touched on it earlier around the cyber-informed engineering piece, and you must see environments all the time that maybe have these legacy technologies. You're right, we can't just rip out old, replace with new. Is there some things you need to keep in mind if you are in this position and maybe you heard the FBI director's speech a couple of weeks ago and found out that China's all in our systems and it's the sort of big, oh God moment. What can we look at here as, okay, I need to make sure at least the basics are in place of my legacy systems to make sure we're as secure as possible?
Yeah, I guess if I had a hot take, it would be that I'm not on board with China's in all of our systems. And China may be in some of our systems, and there may be some kind of, poster examples of what not to do, but those will happen everywhere. So yes, I wouldn't doubt that China is in some systems. Is China in our most critical systems? Probably not. That's a different discussion. So what wasn't stated was they're in our most critical systems, deeply embedded. And if that was the case, and they said we didn't know, then how did we know they were there? I mean, the logic just doesn't pan out for me. So yes, China's probably in some systems, but we're also probably in their systems, and other governments are probably involved in other systems. And I mean, that's par for the course for a nation state game. But what I don't want is a freak out and panic and alarm about, oh my God, China can turn off the grid. It's just not designed that way. First of all, I could get on an hour-long soapbox about the design of the power system and how we already built it with that in mind, from weather and earthquakes and wildfire and all these other issues. So you can't take out the grid because, first of all, it's not a grid, it's multiple grids that are all designed to isolate an island separately. And so we did have some cyber informed engineering built in, and it could be better. Water systems, for example, like the, quote unquote Oldsmar attack, which is maybe an attack, maybe not. A lot of water systems are designed so that even if you did, attack the chlorine pump and say, I want, a billion parts per million to go into that water system, the tank that delivers it is maybe 5 gallons, and the pipe that delivers it from that 5 gallon tank is this teeny tiny little pipe. It was designed so that you just can't flood it with chlorine because it's dangerous. So that's where that cyber informed engineering comes in. And there's just a lot of things built into OT that I'm not like freaked out and alarmed. And I'm certainly not, alarmed by a nation state doing what nation states do. So,
No, fair enough. And I think you read that from the outside or you see the headline.
right.
And don't get me wrong, the headline's job is to catch eyes. It
Exactly.
cool out,
Exactly.
yeah.
Right. And timing is right. I mean, there's tensions with China and all of those things. So, just factor those things in. And I've got a long-standing phrase of always be careful about listening to the loudest person in the room. That's just, one of those things you got to think about every time that happens.
Yeah. I guess the awareness is good and it's whatever. It might translate into sort of further action or something like that. But I guess your message is here is not to panic that we're all going to be shut down and out of power tomorrow.
Right.
Fingers
Right.
crossed. Fair enough. You touched on it a little bit earlier around skills in the space, and the skills will change when the new technology comes in. In
Sure.
the current state, ignoring sort of the future for the moment, do you think there's maybe a skills shortage or a skills gap to a degree?
Yeah, we're looking at a skill shortage that is, I think, if anything, I'm more afraid of our skill shortage than I am anything else. I got to be honest.
Mm.
We've got our legacy environments, they are difficult to maintain and they're delicate, but the people that ran them knew them so well, they could almost just like, Jedi sixth sense when something was wrong and be able to isolate what it was within seconds just by the way they knew that system. Sound, feel, vibration in the floor, even just the smell of the equipment in some cases. They could tell what
Wow.
was wrong with it. We don't have that kind of institutional knowledge in a lot of cases anymore because a lot of the people that did that, they were generational and employees. They, third, fourth generation people. And in some cases, I've been to utilities where they're on their fourth or fifth generation of person from the same family that has gone to work at the plant.
Mm.
And that's just what you do. And, they pass that knowledge down and that all those little subtleties come with it. When someone new comes in, and let's say you're maybe a digital native, which is a good thing in a different sense, but in this sense, it's much more challenging for you to think in an analog way. So we're looking at a situation where the people that come in don't understand it and maybe don't want to and aren't really very well equipped to understand it because it kind of takes unlearning some of the things that they've learned. And again, those things are very useful in other contexts, but in this analog space, it becomes very challenging. So we call it the gray out, where we're losing a lot of really, really good old school knowledge as people leave the organization and they get to rightfully retire. They've worked at that plant like 40 years and it's okay. You can go. You don't have to like strap yourself to that machine until you die. But we do need to somehow capture that knowledge before they leave because those legacy machines are still going to be there for a while. So what I'm seeing is there's not people coming into the space. First of all, there's just not a lot of people that are interested in learning old school analog machines. They want to learn new school digital stuff because that's what they grew up with. So, I mean, that's not, like I said, it's not a bad thing. It's a natural thing. It's expected, but it does create a very significant challenge where we've got the new workforce doesn't have any interest in working on old analog machines. It's just not there. So we have these, retirees that are retiring and coming back as a consultant for a quarter time or a half time, or they wait a year or two and they get tired of golfing or fishing and they're like, well, I want to just do something with my brain and stay sharp. So they'll come back and contract for two, three, four times their original salary just to keep that machine alive and keep breathing life into the system. But there isn't somebody that can come in behind them that they can train. So it's a very significant problem. I don't have like here's your silver bullet solution.
Mm.
It just doesn't exist. There's all kinds of challenges around the things I mentioned, but another one is there's a sense of responsibility that comes with these big machines. If the plant goes down, if there's an industrial accident because of my watch and what I did, I don't want to be responsible for an insurance claim or people dying possibly. So there's almost a fear of coming into that space and going backward and learning those technologies. There's just not a lot of interest, a lot of motivation. So there's a bunch of factors that are pushing against us getting qualified, skilled people to continue to manage these things.
Yeah, so I guess it's not even a case of like these, like the skills are accessible, but it's almost like a social factor of, or an interest factor, and which is
Yeah.
a whole different dynamic to skill
Yeah.
level and things like that. And I guess what you mentioned there, these people are responsible for running these machines, breathing life into them. Is that from a security standpoint? Are these the people that are also looking after the cybersecurity behind these machines as well? Then.
Yeah. And the older the machine, the more the cybersecurity is built into the engineering aspect as well. So those two are a lot less easy to separate. So they're more tuned together. So like your old analog devices, those kinds of things, they're also not in a lot of cases, they're not directly digital connected. They come through a few systems and then hit a place where they actually like hit Ethernet, that kind of thing. It's all serial and hardwired and that kind of stuff, depending upon the age of the system. But those are still out there and they do still exist and they do still need maintenance and they do have digital parts that fail. I mean, backplanes fail and boards fail, that kind of thing. Sensors fail. So they do still need maintenance. They do still need kind of that it's cyber, but it's not cyber in the same sense that we think of today, where it's actually like Ethernet connected. You pull up a web-based console, and there's all kinds of clicky things in a GUI. It's just not the same. It's a completely different world, but it is very closely knitted to the engineering aspect. So they can do that job fairly well, almost as one person, with even a little bit of cybersecurity training as an engineer,
Mm.
and still keep that system relatively safe. I mean, as safe as it can be.
Yeah, understood. And I guess it's sort of the person I think of when we talk about this is maybe not your super well-funded teams of maybe an energy organization where they've got a whole dedicated OT security division, but more of
Right.
a, I don't know, your a local water wastage plant where the engineer that, like you say, has been there for 20, 30 years, they are in effect the cybersecurity person there. They might not be
Yeah.
called cybersecurity engineer, but they are doing all of the cybersecurity behind it. When they
Yeah.
leave, it's like, what happens then?
Yeah.
Where's that person come from? So, I
Yeah.
mean, could we get these people from? I mean, could we look at sort of transferring people from an IT side of the house to the OT side of the house? Could we look at maybe
Sure.
training engineers through the process, through some cyber awareness? What's the? I know there's no
Yeah.
silver bullet here.
We're trying both of those things. I think the bigger challenge is there isn't like a training program that fits both.
Mm,
There isn't like one. If everyone just learned these things, then they could, be the right kind of role or have the right knowledge and skills for this kind of thing. I think IT people have to unlearn a lot of things, and even engineers have to unlearn a lot of things because they've got a lot of practices and culture and a different mindset. On the IT side, there's a lot of there's outage is okay, right? It's just down. We'll get it back up. We're good at getting it back up. We're really good at firefighting. That's it's a different feel. And they know that there's a pressure to get it back up. When the corporate email is down and the executives are breathing down your neck, or God forbid you got ransomware in your environment, I mean, they move into action and they do a really good job at getting things back up. It's not like they're okay with outage. They're more okay with outage than they are in the OT space, because OT space outage, depending on how, can mean dead people
yeah,
or machine loss, which is not just a few $1 million. It's like the company is broke because the machine is dead, gone. Like if you, for example, wreck an aluminum smelter, okay, that's the core of the business. That could mean bankruptcy for that business. So there's a different kind of approach. On the engineering side, I work with a lot of engineers and they're absolutely brilliant people, but their solution to everything is an engineering solution. And there's a difference with engineering mindset in such that engineering deals with physics and the laws of nature. And Mother Nature can be harsh, but she's not malicious. There's a difference because cybersecurity thinks about not just Mother Nature, but a determined malicious adversary working against you using knowledge of the fact that you designed it for physics against you. So there's a different thing to learn, and you have to unlearn your gravity toward solving the laws of nature. We'll solve everything. Well, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. So they come at it from very different perspectives, but each of them have so much to bring to this that like the base of their knowledge, 80-90% of what they know is really transportable. It's very useful. So we just have to kind of add those elements, and in some cases it means, I'll just be, perfectly honest, it takes some letting down their ego because they're usually really good, damn good at what they do. But this means they've got to be vulnerable and let down their ego and learn something a little bit differently, and maybe kind of give in to some of those deep tenets that they've held for so long in their own or their original discipline.
that must be quite challenging. Just thinking through that, I'm 10 years into my career, say, but someone who's 20, 30 years in,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
it can be challenging, but we do need them. And that's the thing, is we're going to have to borrow them because taking somebody from scratch, it can certainly be done. There's not a lot of programs out there that offer like entry level OT training. It just honestly, it just doesn't exist.
yeah,
There's some free stuff from CISA, which is great, but it scratches the surface of what's needed to actually, get hands-on keyboard or, hands-on console for an OT person. That's there's just not a lot of entry level stuff. And I applaud the organizations out there. I know of them, and you shout out for you doing it, but they give people literally like entry level openings in their OT SOC or somewhere else where people can just come in and learn from the ground up. But it's just we're at an area right now where there's an absolute dearth of options for people to get into the space or reskill into the space from, say, an Uber driver,
mm,
right? Just some other thing where they want something better and they're hungry and they're motivated and they're driven and they want to learn, but there just isn't an option for them. So we've got a challenge getting IT people in. We've got a challenge getting OT people in. We've got a challenge getting new people in. We don't just have, here are some paths. I wish I could say, oh, just do these things from
mm.
wherever you're coming from and you could get there. So I know there's a bunch of us that are trying to get some options. I've seen DOE is doing some good programs. Idaho Labs doing some good programs. All the labs, frankly, are doing some good programs. There's some private organizations that are trying to help as well. It's just kind of it's getting started. It's not there yet.
Mm. No, I think it will, and it seems to be sort of tracking. Like if you take like IT security or enterprise security, 10 years ago, there'd be one or two people in the company doing doing governance, risk compliance, security engineering, and a bit of incident response type stuff. And then the last 10 years or so from where I've sat, that's certainly built out and it's got more traction. And through that, there's that then, oh, okay, you're a developer. Well, maybe you can do application security because you're already sort of doing it anyway. So
Yes.
I think these things will happen and come here. And it's just a case of, because there are a few more different factors to it, feeling out what works and what doesn't work. Have you sort of seen anything in particular that's maybe an example or two that's sort of come out and you've gone, oh, that really worked. We brought Jeff in from engineering over here and he was brilliant, or someone from the IT side maybe that sort of followed a particular path?
Yeah, it has happened, and I've seen some really good transferal of skills. I've seen some IT people that have come into OT and just they fell in love with it because of a lot of really good obvious reasons. Is some people really do want that responsibility. They want to know that at the end of the day, when they go to sleep at night, they actually kept the machine from going boom. In reality, you kept the lights on, you kept the water flowing. So there are some people that have that motivator. And those are usually the right people for the job because their thought process, their ethos is in the right place. And the same thing on the OT side, when you take an engineer, and there's a lot of engineers that have a gravity toward technology anyway. And this can come from all fields, like, civil, mechanical, or electrical. They all can lean into the technology side fairly well because they use a lot of technology in their training. So when they're going to college, they're already using a lot of technology to get their degree. So they're fairly familiar with some of these things. Some of them have a natural gravity to it. They're kind of tinkerers already. So they want to play with it. And that can be a good motivator for them as well as like, hey, here's a whole new field to feed your thirst for knowledge on these things. So they're often pretty hungry in that space as well. So they are really good places to tap into. That said, there's also a limited amount of people in both of those fields too. So we're kind of stealing from an already barely staffed area to begin with to take to add to a really understaffed area. So in general, we just need a lot more technical training across the board for people. I mean, it should be taught like in grade school. I mean, we need to have people that know how to use this technology and not just digital natives in the sense that they can use a telephone or an iPad or something like that. It's really understanding how things like networks work, how all of these fundamental components fit together, and just the architecture of things, and not that they got to be like god level programmers, but at least understand what code is and the basics of how code works. So some of those things I think should be taught at a much earlier stage so we've got that workforce for tomorrow. But like I said, right now, there just isn't like an easy path. I'm looking, and they're starting, not like there's nothing out there at all, but it's still at its earliest stages. So if there's anything, I would say continue to support those programs that are helping the early stage.
Yeah, that's fair. And you're right, there is a lot of stuff out there. And you touched on a few of the things earlier, the Idaho Labs, the sisters putting some good stuff out there. If I'm, as an example, and if I'm a civil engineer, I'm say 2 years into my career, got my college degree and I'm sort of doing well, and I've got like an interest in cybersecurity, it might have come from, I don't know, something simple like a friend of mine socially engineered themselves into my hotel room, or I watched, I don't know, Mr. Robot on Amazon Prime, whatever it might be, and like, this looks cool, actually, I've got a bit of an interest in this. Is there like something you would advise going to first? Is it like is it the Idaho Labs, for example, or is it just a flick around YouTube? Is it maybe a paid course? What's the sort of, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably your easiest place to start is that CISA kind of virtual training package. It gives you a decent understanding, at least of, like I said, it scratches the surface, but it gives you a fair understanding to start with and help you wrap your head around some of those things. And depending upon your OT knowledge already, some of it will be remedial, but at least it's confirming and helps you know that, okay, this is going to be part of my, knowledge base going forward as well. It's not something that I've got to, I'm not going to think about again. So it is good to even go through it, even if it's just to confirm what you need to know and you already know. From there, I do recommend trying to get on at conferences. A lot of conferences do have kind of early speaking tracks. So submit a paper on something that's interesting to you, do a little bit of your own research, and just talk about what your research was. Even if it's, not like particularly technical or groundbreaking, it doesn't have to be something like controversial or groundbreaking or hyper technical. A lot of this just is people want to see what research has been done. All of those things can be useful for a call for papers. And there are a lot of conferences that will allow like new people into the career or first timers. They'll have a discount or even a free path in some cases. If you are a woman, a person of color, sometimes they even have options for them that are free or drastically discounted for obvious reasons. And then we need a lot more diversity in the field, definitely so. And then there's the There are paid courses, there are free courses, there are a lot of YouTube things. My good friend Monte Elkins has got a really great YouTube called Coke and Strippers, and it's not what you think. It's actually like Diet Coke and wire strippers. So, obviously
A
an
headline grabber.
ear-catching name. Yeah.
Yeah,
There are some great YouTube channels to help you learn. Don Weber does some really good stuff too. So if you're hungry and you're motivated and you're willing to put all that time in to learn it kind of on the free without a budget, then you can do it, but it's almost a full-time job just to learn those things. So if you've got a family and kids and other obligations and a full-time job during the day that maybe works you more than 40 hours, those things are a challenge. So, the other option is, of course, paid courses, but most of the paid courses kind of come at a second or third tier knowledge base to start with, just because there's not traditionally there hasn't been a lot of course options for the entry level stuff. And they're, like I say, they're starting to be some, but they're still just getting off the ground and just getting started.
that's fair. How do you rate, if you are looking to get into this space, how do you rate sort of the whole networking and the conference thing? And just
Yeah.
to help frame that up, just from my experience alone, I found that looking at conferences in the OT or the ICS space seem to be less vendor in your face immediately. Little things like you go onto the homepage and it's not like insert large tech organization here typed down. And it's a bit more, I find that a bit more open, a bit more, maybe less intimidating, I'd say.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I'm high-fiving on that one. It's a much, much, much more open space. It's got its vendor weight to it because it has to. I mean, conferences aren't cheap, they're not free.
No,
I've,
of
I've
course.
done them myself, and they're enormously expensive and very challenging to put on from a logistics perspective. But that aside, the OT community they're very mission focused. I mean, I've seen operators, like if you're on the control center floor of a very large transmission system, your child could be bleeding out on the floor and you're going to keep that system up and running because of the balance of those risks in your mind. They're so dedicated to what they do. That passion comes through and it's infectious. So when you're at an OT event, you can't help but feel the vibe and you become kind of sucked in by the gravity. And there, like any organization or any kind of discipline or field, there are those that are, egotistical jerks. That happens, and they'll be off-putting. So everybody has those, but I think we have less of them, and we have less vendor presence in the sense that it's a bunch of in your face. Like I'm on the RSA floor, for example, it's just an assault on the senses. And any of your OT events, granted, they're not that big, so trying to accommodate for scale, I still don't think it would come to that same level. The closest one I've seen is like Distributech, which is kind of like the RSA for the electric space. But I agree, by and large, it is a much more open field. We've got a lot of people that are really dedicated and want to bring more people in. And I think also a lot of us know that we're only going to be alive so long. We got to replace ourselves at some point with a bunch of smart people to do the jobs.
Mm,
And as the technology changes, we're seeing this change right in front of us. So we know that we not only need to replace ourselves, but replace ourselves with different mindsets and different people.
indeed. So definitely get yourself out there to conferences, guys. If you're listening to
Yeah,
this and you want to pick up some knowledge, or maybe you're in that sort of camp of I'm not 100% sure this is what I want to do.
I couldn't agree more. Again, I think when if you go to a conference, actually, no, just go to a conference, period. That's a command. When you go to the conference, don't be shy. It's going to be difficult, especially a lot of engineers aren't necessarily the most extroverted personalities. Even a lot of IT security people aren't the most extroverted personalities. Get outside of your comfort zone and go to lunches, go to dinners, just talk to people, tell them you're interested in the space. And I think all you have to do is say, I'm interested in the space. I think that's literally the only thing you have to say. And you'll likely have a very new, a best friend just right there on the spot. Someone's like, oh, you're interested? Let me tell you about what we do and why it's important and why you should probably come help me do what I'm doing because we need you. I think you'll find it very open and genuine and something that has, like I said, it just has this natural gravity to it. So when you go, don't be shy, make some new friends, and you'll find that you'll end up having some friends for life. It's a fantastic community.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm guessing not quite the same, but it's sort of mirrored on your socials, LinkedIn, for example. If you were to reach out to some of the people on there, it's the same sort of thing. People are always happy to help. I think it's maybe less of a wall between. us and you, us and them.
Yeah, I mean, I have people reach out to me all the time, and I do what I can. There's a bunch of us in the space that are trying to get people in. I know Gabe Abgarucci is fantastic at this. He's got a really good YouTube thread on breaking into to OT. I did a podcast with him. I learned so much from him on trying to get people in the space. Just a fantastic person in general. And
Mm.
like we've got a person that reached out that is like a product manager at a large mobile app company and just said, I'm tired of what I'm doing. I've heard about OT. I want to get into OT. And we've been working for probably 6 months to find something in terms of training. This person has like 2 kids at home. It's a good example of one of those people that really just doesn't have much time, but really wants to. So he's been, studying YouTube channels. But he's come a long way in 6 months. And I would say probably within maybe 2 more months, he'll be ready to employ at an entry level as an OT person.
Wow.
But it's taken a little bit of time, and it's not been as I've gone through this with him. It's been absolutely eye opening to realize just how little there is for somebody with no OT knowledge coming in. He's got a good IT background. Like I say, he's not an app developer. He's not an IT security person, but he definitely understands IT. But just starting with that much and trying to come into the space, it's been a very, very significant hill to climb.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Hopefully that gets easy with time, and it's efforts like
Yeah.
these, and maybe just even discussing what we're doing now. Hopefully that will
Yes.
catch a few ears and you know change
Yeah.
perspective, perhaps.
As they say, recognizing the problem is the first step in solving it. So
Here we go. Here we go. And so we talked about vendors a moment there with the whole conference piece. It sort of ties into a topic I wanted to sort of bounce off you really, and I've got a feeling I know where you're going to go with it. But if we look at people, process, technology when it comes to solving OT security, is there one of those areas that stands out more than others, or is it we need to combine the whole triangle there?
yeah, I would definitely say people. It weighs much,
Okay.
much, much, much more than the process or the technology. Process and technology can be learned, and that's the I don't want to say the easy part, but it's the easier part.
Mm,
The people part is the hardest because you're changing culture, and that is the hardest thing. You can change process and you can change technology. Like I say, they're not easy to change, but they're easier to change than changing culture because getting people to think differently, act differently, and not just temporarily, but actually do it and make it part of their fabric. That is a very, very difficult challenge. And if you talk to like organizational change management people, process and technology are a slam dunk compared to people. People are the hardest part.
wow.
For example, security awareness. It's one of the hardest jobs out there. It's one of the most thankless jobs out there. And everyone just craps all over it. And they all know that if you can change the culture and get people to think about it, I mean, think about what we did with safety in the OT space. Like in the 70s, safety was atrocious. People were dying all the time from industrial accidents, but it took years and they changed the culture. And you can go to any OT company, every single person in that company knows that safety is their job without question. And not just part of their job, but primary in their job, more important than anything else they do. But that was a culture shift and it took years to happen. If we could do the same thing with security, which we can, we just haven't done it yet, or starting, but we have to get past that hurdle of awareness is this thing that you have to do every quarter and it's a pain in the neck and I got to watch
Yeah.
another change your password video and make your passwords long and don't use USB sticks. I already know all this. And I would know a phishing email when I saw it. And then they're the next person to click on one and get busted. So
Mm,
it's the hardest part. Without question, it's the hardest part.
yeah, understood. And is that resistance to change because we've just done things away for so long? Does security get in the way of what we do? Is it a combination, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those things. I mean, and I think it goes back to like safety. I mean, when we went and told people back in the 70s when there's a bunch of industrial accidents, you told them basically you're not safe. You're not operating safely. And they'd be like, well, yeah, I am. I'm safe. I know what I'm doing. But they didn't. So
Mm,
there's a lot of, I guess, unrecognized ego, of course, in this. And there's a lot of other factors that just make people very resistant to changing. And just like in the safety practices, you're changing the way they do their job. And it makes their job honestly more difficult. I mean, every time you log in, you have to go get a 6-digit code. You type it in wrong once, type it in wrong again. I need to do this. And, I need to go to lunch or I got to answer this other email and I got to get on a meeting and you're slowing me down. And it's frustrating. So I get it. And we're still working on that balance as security professionals in designing the system so that it doesn't have those security hurdles, but it is inherently more secure, right? And we did that with safety systems too, so that the equipment itself was designed more safely so that you didn't have to go through all those extra steps to operate it safely. So those things go back and forth and they have to work together. But, you know, we can work on that, make the things more secure and less challenging to be secure, but the people also have to embrace the fact that, okay, I've got to do this multi-factor thing because it's the right thing to do and not get grumpy about it.
Yeah, understood, understood. And this next question I wanted to ask you does tie into the people somewhat. So I speak to a wide variety of people in this space, and some with very established teams and organizations, and some developing. And the ones in the more developing situations where maybe they haven't got a fully flushed team, sometimes it comes back with, look, we haven't got the budget to spend on cybersecurity or OT security.
Yeah.
We haven't got this. We can't give you any more people. I guess, where am I going with this question? Do you know of any ways of, maybe speaking to, if you're an OT engineer and you're that person that's tasked with cybersecurity, you can see things aren't as tight as they maybe could be. Are there any particular ways of grabbing the attention of the higher ups to say, look, I'm not asking for millions here, but I'm asking for X, a small win to begin with that will then turn into better wins for you?
Yeah, I've got a whole talk on this. This is a challenge for almost all departments I see out there. They go to management asking for security improvements.
Mm.
And that's the problem. Don't go to management asking for security improvements. And that might sound like heresy,
Mm.
but management will respond to, we have seen X number of outage issues or downtime issues or near downtime issues because of these problems. I need this technology to fix this so that we don't have this downtime problem.
So it's not, you didn't even mention security. It's
Not
not a
once.
security thing. It's
No,
downtime.
right. We've got, there was, 4 human error issues. I want to design a system so that the human error can be worked out. And that is going to basically catch things like, the wrong login or the wrong permissions, let's just say, so that you can go through and restructure your Active Directory so that certain permissions just aren't allowed and you don't have that span of control to cause those problems. That's a security issue, but don't talk about it in security matters. Talk about it in an operational issue. We've had 4 near misses because of permissions. I want to fix these permissions so we don't have downtime. We don't have network visibility, and we've noticed that we think that there is an issue with the way certain commands are issued from the SCADA master to the SCADA endpoint or the PLCs. We're not sure what it is. We need a visibility tool to figure out and diagnose the problem so we can stop this outage from happening.
And that's because it's in dollars.
Yeah.
Downtime equals dollars, right? Or
Right.
less dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, but don't talk about it in security. Just turn around and phrase the same issue in operational terms. I need this to diagnose an operational problem. Now you're asking for a test kit, a scope. You're not asking for a security tool.
Yes, that makes sense. And I guess especially as if that person isn't security minded as such, it just
Well,
eliminates that
right, your plant
resistance.
manager, yeah, your plant manager, honestly, is they just want the machines to run. That's
Yeah.
all. So if you come back to them and say the machine is not running perfectly, or it's got downtime issues, or we can't diagnose why it's got downtime issues, they're going to give you the money you need to make sure that machine runs.
So true. So true. Well, if you're listening and you're struggling on the budget, just remove security from any conversation you're having at the moment, any email,
Yeah.
and replace with dollars and actual figures and what the business worries about, I guess. Yeah. Shareholders
Yeah.
and all the rest of it. Well, Patrick, we've jumped around here and I've taken a lot and it's gone very, very quickly. But just before we close up here, what are you looking forward to in this space over the next few months?
I am looking forward to seeing where all of our new technology takes us. I'm actually one of the few people that is completely on board with things like AI and ML and LLMs in our space. I'm also on board with things like cloud. I do see that there are enormous risks that come with this. So don't think that I don't understand that part. But I also know that if we just pretend that it doesn't exist and push it away, we're going to suffer from all the benefits that it can bring to our space. So what I'm particularly focused on is how do we get people to stop trying to tap the brakes on this and get them to embrace it, kind of come up alongside of it and make good friends with it and teach it good manners. That's, I think, what our approach needs to be instead. So I'm really looking forward to the professionals changing their mindset, getting into this, helping it unfurl and unravel in a way that is really, really useful for us and takes us into a place where we've got this next generation, next generation OT that is, something brand new and amazing.
That's awesome. And so what are the things that, like, I don't know, AI or cloud, in your eyes, how do you see
Yeah.
them benefiting our environments at the moment?
Like, we'll start with cloud. One of the most important cloud things I'm seeing is we're looking at doing operations in the cloud, which is absolutely frightening. I mean, at the same time, I'm like literally scared of doing this, but I've also seen some of we call it cloud. It really just means someone else's computer. That's all it means. It's not like cloud really, but there are companies that are like standing up immutable offsite private cloud backup solutions for your control center, so that in the event you do get ransomware in your control center, you can basically burn it to the ground and go operate from a tertiary offsite place that you don't own, that will still work. And it's better than your control center full of ransomware and you being down. That is a reliability, a resilience option that is now something that's a real thing. It's just one of the many approaches. And then, of course, the ability for us to throw out, billions of new forms of sensing. Because originally sensing was difficult. The sensors were expensive. The wiring for the sensors was expensive. Bringing it back into a processing environment was expensive. All of this stuff is now scaled out, so we can throw out billions of things into our environment, understand our environment in ways we could never do in the past, tune that environment to be ridiculously efficient, and take all of that data, crunch it with AI and ML and other data analytics tools, and do all kinds of really interesting things about our operation. And we can probably even make data products out of our operational data and sell those, because data equals money. So this new landscape is just a complete, game changer in so many ways. That's an understatement. But all these tools will give us the ability to see and use all of that rich new data in ways that we can't imagine right now.
That's awesome. Well, looking forward to this happening over the next 6, 12 months or so, and hopefully we'll see that transition. We'll get more people into the space, and it'll be a brighter space to be in.
I agree. Let's get more people in.
Let's get them in. Let's get them in. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for that. If people wanted to reach out, LinkedIn a good place to find you?
Oh, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, whatever is left of X or Twitter, or God forbid it's even alive tomorrow. I'm also on Mastodon. I'm everywhere. I'm Patrick C. Miller on almost all platforms. So
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it. We'll wrap up there, and I'll speak to you soon.
fantastic. Thanks.